when it comes to pure public goods, it has to satisfy two requirements. Those two requirements is that these goods in question need to be non-rivalrous and non-excludable, or at least quite non-rivalrous and quite non-excludable. Non-rivalrous means that if one person decides to consume the good, then the amount available for others does not go down. So a piece of pie would be rivalrous. As soon as someone has a piece of it, that's less that other people can consume. If you had an apple orchard with a certain amount of apples, well, as soon as one consumes one, there's less available. It's rivalrous as well. If we are talking about a national park, well, in that situation there, the rivalry may not be as bad if the national park is very, very large. As soon as one person goes to walk in the national park, it's still available for other people to walk as well. So that would be a little bit more non-rivalrous. Or if we think of a radio station, if someone listens to the radio, other people still have access to it. So that is a good example of something that's purely non-rivalrous. Non-excludable is that a good or service that we cannot prevent others from consuming it. So if we're talking about a national park, we cannot put a fence around it. We cannot block access. If we're thinking about TV signals, well, if it's or radio signals, if the signal's sent and anyone could capture it, that's non-excludable. But if we're dealing with satellite dishes and you need to be a member and all that, well, then you're excluding. You're preventing certain people from using it. So you're having only the people that pay have access to the service and others not. Pure public goods are a situation where no one is excluded from the service, and as people use it, it doesn't remove other people's value of that service. So if we think of fighting climate change, well, as soon as we do that, or building different barriers to if there's hurricanes or other things that come in, well, those things help a lot of people. We're not saying, well, this will protect this house only, the other houses not so much. It's provided by the government. Normally it's to protect as much as possible. Okay. Same thing with public protection through army or police. And normally we're not really excluding between individuals. Okay. So this is the kind of situations that we may have of providing for public goods. So when we think of public goods, there's a lot of questions that come to mind. Sadly, in this class, we don't have enough time to cover these, but these kinds of questions of how much greenhouse gases should we emit, should we keep things at status quo, what's the cost-benefit analysis, all of these things here are interesting topics that you would see if you do the environmental economics class, which is ECHO 237. And it's super interesting, but sadly we just don't have the time here. But this last little point, the optimal quantity of a public good is when marginal cost equals the sum of all users' marginal cost of the good. I just want to highlight this for a second here. So if we think back to demand curves, if we had two demand curves for Jim and Tony, and we said for different prices, so here Jim at $1, he demands 0, and so on and so forth. And then here Tony, let's make him a little bit different, or actually it's the same. Let's just say he's exactly the same, so this is the setup that they have. Well, how do we determine what would be my total market demand? So the sum of the two would be to look at this specific price, what's the quantity? At $1, none of them demand anything. At 80 cents, well, we have this distance plus this distance, which represents like maybe 1 unit plus another unit. So here at 80 cents, we would have 2 units. Okay, and so on and so forth. So essentially what we're doing is we're looking at every price level and we're summing the horizontal distance Because our horizontal distance tells me at this price here, whatever this price may be, this is the quantity here that Jim is willing to consume. And for the same price here, this is the quantity that Tony's willing to consume. So for this price, I'm going to add up what both are willing to consume, and it's going to give me my total demand for these two guys. And if I think of a whole large market, you would do that for every single individual. But that tells you how many units people are willing to pay at different prices. If we're dealing with public goods, people are not supposed to be paying for this good. So what we may be looking at instead is we'll look at a situation where we have, in this situation here, let's say I'll have this individual here, individual A, and over here I'll have individual B, which has more of a situation like this. Well, here what I'm wondering is, well, what's the total value, the total willingness to pay for one unit? So if I look for this first unit here and I look for this first unit, well, this individual here was willing to pay $5. This individual was willing to pay $4. So we could say that for this first unit, the willingness to pay is $9. So here we're looking at different quantities and we're adding up the willingness to pay to determine what's the total value to all consumers. So we would do that for all of these quantities. We'd look at the total value, the total marginal benefits of providing this good. So if we think of protecting polar bears, well, essentially, if there's this option of protecting polar bears a certain quantity, well, how much are you willing to pay to keep this amount of polar bears? Well, if you look at it and you look at the cost of protecting them, you'd look and sum up the marginal benefits of everyone. You notice that there's quite a large value to keeping this species alive. So therefore, there's a lot of willingness to pay if we aggregate everyone's benefits. And we compare that to the cost and we determine whether we want to provide for it or not. If we go back to the free rider example, well, we saw that for that first security guard, one had a willingness to pay of $125 and one of $75. So that total willingness to pay was $200. If this was the government deciding if they could hire a security guard for less than $200 and then tax these individuals to pay for this security guard, this would be beneficial for everyone compared to the situation that no one gets hired or so on. Okay, so it's in this case here, when we're dealing with summing market demands, we're dealing with horizontal summation, which is looking at a price and adding up horizontally. And here when we deal with public goods, we're dealing with vertical summation, adding up this way instead.